Namaskar students. Hope you are hale and hearty, taking care of your studies and your health. The questions of present often find their answers in the past. Yes, that's what history is all about. When Britishers entered in India, their sole motive was profit. That's what we are going to do today. How they changed the entire picture of Indian agriculture. That is what we are going to take up. So today we'll be taking up chapter number 3, Ruling the Countryside, from our history book, Our Past, part 3. So let's get going. The chapter opens with the picture of Robert Clive accepting the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa from the Mughal ruler in 1765. On 12th August 1765, the Mughal emperor appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. The actual event most probably took place in Robert Clive's tent, with a few Englishmen and Indians as witnesses. But in the painting above, the event is shown as a majestic occasion taking place in a grand setting. The painter was commissioned by Clive to record the memorable event in Clive's life. The grant of Diwani clearly was one such event in British imagination. As Diwan, the company became the chief financial administrator of the territory under its control. Now it had to think of administering the land and organizing its revenue resources. This had to be done in a way that could yield enough revenue to meet the growing expenses of the company. A trading company had also to ensure that it could buy the products it needed and sell what it wanted. Over the years, the company also learned that it had to move with some caution. Being an alien power, it needed to pacify those who in the past had ruled the countryside and enjoyed authority and prestige. Those who had held local power had to be controlled, but they could not be entirely eliminated. Now, the biggest question was, how was this to be done? So, the company had become the Diwan, but it still saw itself primarily as a trader. It wanted a large revenue income but was unwilling to set up any regular system of assessment and collection. The effort was to increase the revenue as much as it could and buy fine cotton and silk cloth as cheaply as possible. Within 5 years, the value of goods bought by the company in Bengal doubled. Before 1865, the company had purchased goods in India by importing gold and silver from Britain. Now the revenue collected in Bengal could finance the purchase of goods for export. Soon it was clear that Bengal's economy was facing a deep crisis. Artisans were deserting the villages since they were being forced to sell their goods to the company at a very low price. Farmers were unable to pay the dues that were being demanded from them. Artisanal production was in decline and agricultural cultivation showed signs of collapse. You can very well imagine the state of economy at that time. Then in 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal. About 1/3 of the population was wiped out. So, the need to improve agriculture was the main focus. If the economy was in ruins, could the company be certain of its revenue income? Most company officials began to feel that investment in land had to be encouraged and agriculture had to be improved. How was this to be done? After 2 decades of debate on the question, the company finally introduced the permanent settlement in 1793. By the terms of settlement, the Rajas and Talukas were recognized as Zimidars. So, here you can see when the Zamindar term came to Indian prospect. It was in 1793. They were asked to collect rent from the peasants and pay revenue to the company. The amount to be paid was fixed permanently. That is, it was not to be increased ever in the future. It was felt that this would ensure a regular flow of revenue into the company's coffers and at the same time encourage the zamindars to invest in improving the land. Since the revenue demand of the state would not be increased, the zamindar would benefit from increased production from the land. Now here comes the problem. The permanent settlement, however, created problems. So now the problem was the revenue that had been fixed was so high that the zamindars found it difficult to pay. Anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost his zamindari. Numerous zamindaris were sold off at auctions organized by the company. By the first decade of the 19th century, the situation changed. The prices in the market rose and cultivation slowly expanded. This meant an increase in the income of the zamindars but no gain for the company since it could not increase the revenue demand that had been fixed permanently. Even the zamindars did not have an interest in improving the land. Some had lost their land in the earlier years of the settlement. Others now saw the possibility of earning without the trouble and risk of investment. As long as the zamindars could give out the land to the tenants and get rent, they were not interested in improving the land. On the other hand, in the villages, the cultivators found the system extremely oppressive. The rent they paid to the zamindar was high and their right on the land was insecure. To pay the rent, they had to often take a loan from the moneylender, and when they failed to pay the rent, they were evicted from the land or their rights were taken from them. So, a new system was devised. So, in the northwestern provinces of Bengal Presidency, most of this area is now in Uttar Pradesh, an Englishman called Holt Mackenzie devised the new system which came into effect in 1822. He felt that the village was an important social institution in North Indian society and needed to be preserved. Under his directions, collectors went from village to village inspecting the land, measuring the fields and recording the customs and rights of different groups. The estimated revenue of each plot within a village was added up to calculate the revenue that each village, which was called mahal, had to pay. This demand was to be revised periodically, not permanently fixed. The charge of collecting the revenue and paying it to the company was given to the village headman rather than the zamindar. This system came to be known as Mahalwari settlement. So now you can clearly see how zamindari's failure gave birth to Mahalwari settlement. Now out here we must keep in mind the Munro system. Now what was this Munro system? In the British territories in the south, there were a similar move away from the idea of permanent settlement. The new system that was devised came to be known as the Rayatwar or Rayatwari. It was tried on a small scale by Captain Alexander Reed in some of the areas that were taken over by the company after the wars with Tipu Sultan, subsequently developed by Thomas Munro. This system was gradually extended all over South India. Reed and Munro felt that in the south there were no traditional zamindars. The settlement, they argued, had to be made directly with the cultivators who had tilled the land for generations. Their fields had to be carefully and separately surveyed before the revenue assessment was made. Munro thought that the British should act as paternal father figure protecting the rights under their charge. But all was not well. Within a few years after the new system were imposed, it was clear that all was not well with them. Driven by the desire to increase the income from land, revenue officials fixed too high a revenue demand. Peasants were unable to pay. Riots fled the countryside and villages became deserted in many regions. Optimistic officials had imagined that the new system would transform the peasants into rich, enterprising farmers, but this never happened. So now came a huge change in Indian agriculture system. The British also realized that the countryside could not only yield revenue, it could also grow the crops that Europe required. By the late 18th century, the company was trying its best to expand the cultivation of opium and indigo. In the century and a half that followed, the British persuaded or forced cultivators in various parts of India to produce other crops: jute in Bengal, tea in Assam, sugarcane in United Province, which is now known as Uttar Pradesh, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra and Punjab, rice in Madras. So how was this done? The British used a variety of methods to expand the cultivation of crops that they needed. So let's have a close look. So what is this about the color history? Yes, on the screens you can find a picture which shows a kalamkari print created by weavers of Andhra Pradesh in India. On the right is a floral cotton print designed and produced by William Morris, a famous poet and artist of 19th century in Britain. There is one thing common in the two prints. Both use a rich blue color, commonly called indigo. Do you know how this color was produced? The blue that you see in these prints was produced from a plant called indigo. It is likely that the blue dye used in the Morris prints in 19th century Britain was manufactured from indigo plants cultivated in India. For India was the biggest supplier of indigo in the world at that time. So why did they demand for Indian indigo? The answer is very simple. The indigo plant grows primarily in the tropics. Tropics, it's the environmental condition. By the 13th century, Indian indigo was being used by the cloth manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain to dye cloth. However, only small amount of Indian indigo reached the European market and its price was very high. European cloth manufacturers therefore had to depend on another plant called woad to make violet and blue dyes. Being a plant of the temperate zone, woad was more easily available in Europe. It was grown in northern Italy, southern France, and in parts of Germany and Britain. Worried by the competition from indigo, woad producers in Europe pressurized their governments to ban the import of indigo. Cloth dyers, however, preferred indigo as a dye. Indigo produced a rich blue color, whereas the dye from the woad was pale and dull. So by the 17th century, European cloth producers persuaded their governments to relax the ban on indigo import. The French began cultivating indigo in Saint Domingue in the Caribbean islands, the Portuguese in Brazil, the English in Jamaica, and the Spanish in Venezuela. Indigo plantations also came up in many parts of North America. By the end of 18th century, the demand for Indian indigo grew further. Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded dramatically, creating an enormous new demand for cloth dyes. While the demand for indigo increased, its existing supplies from the West Indies and America collapsed for a variety of reasons. Between 1783 and 1789, the production of indigo in the world fell by half. Cloth dyers in Britain now desperately looked for new sources of indigo supply. From where could this indigo be procured? Britain turns to India. Yes, that's what happened. Faced with the rising demand for indigo in Europe, the company in India looked for ways to expand the area under indigo cultivation. From the last decades of the 18th century, indigo cultivation in Bengal expanded rapidly, and Bengal indigo came to dominate the world market. In 1788, only about 30% of indigo imported into Britain was from India. By 1810, the proportion had gone up to 95%. So, here we can see within a span of 22 years, there was an increase by 65%. As the indigo trade grew, commercial agents and officials of the company began investing in indigo production. Over the years, many company officials felt their jobs to look after their indigo business. Attracted by the prospect of high profits, numerous Scotsmen and Englishmen came to India and became planters. Those who had no money to produce indigo could get loan from the company and the banks that were coming up at that time. So how was this indigo cultivated? There were two main systems of indigo cultivation, Nij and Royalty. Within the system of Nij cultivation, the planters produce indigo in land that he directly controlled. He either bought the land or rented it from the zamindar and produced indigo by directly employing hired laborers. Under Nij cultivation, indigo could be cultivated only on fertile lands, and these were all already densely populated. Only small plots scattered over the landscape could be acquired. Planters needed large areas in compact blocks to cultivate indigo in plantations. Where could they get such land from? They attempted to lease in the land around the indigo factory and evict the peasants from that area, but this always led to conflicts and tensions. Nor was labor easily to mobilize. A large plantation required a vast number of hands to operate, and labor was needed precisely at a time when peasants were usually busy with their rice cultivation. So, niche cultivation on a large scale also required many plows and bullocks. One bighah of indigo cultivation required 2 plows. So, till the late 19th century, planters were therefore reluctant to expand the area under niche cultivation. Less than 25% of the land producing indigo was under this system. The rest was under an alternative mode of cultivation, the Riayati system. Now, what is the Riayati system? Under the Riayati system, the planters forced the ryots to sign a contract and agreement which was called satta. At times, they pressurized the village headmen to sign the contract on behalf of the ryot. Those who signed the contract got cash advances from the planters at low rate of interest to produce indigo. But the loan committed the ryot to cultivating indigo on at least 25% of the area under his holding. The planters provided the seeds and the drill, while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seeds, and looked after the crop. When the crop was delivered to the planters after the harvest, a new loan was given to the ryot, and the cycle started all over again. Peasants who were initially tempted by the loan soon realized how harsh the system was. They were falling into a trap. The price they got for indigo they produced was very low, and the cycle of loan never ended. There were other problems too. The planters usually insisted that indigo be cultivated on the best soils, in which peasants prefer to cultivate rice. Indigo, moreover, had deep roots and it exhausted the soil rapidly. After an indigo harvest, the land could not be sown with the rice, and this gave birth to the Blue Rebellion. In March 1859, if we can correlate it to 1857, we can definitely extract a lot of knowledge out of it. So, in March 1859, thousands of ryots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. As the rebellion spread, ryots refused to pay rents to the planters and attacked indigo factories. Armed with swords and spears, bows and arrows, women turned up to fight with the pots, pans, and kitchen implements. Those who worked for the planters were socially boycotted, and the Gomasthas, agents of planters who came to collect rent, were beaten up. Ryots swore they would no longer take advance to sow indigo nor be bullied by the planters' lathials, the lathi-wielding strong men maintained by the planters. Why did the indigo peasant decide that they would no longer remain silent? What gave them the power to rebel? Clearly, the indigo system was intensely oppressive, but those who are oppressed do not always rise up in rebellion. They do so only at times. In 1859, the indigo ryots felt that they had the support of local zamindars and village headmen in their rebellion against the planters. In many villages, headmen who had been forced to sign indigo contracts mobilized the indigo peasants and fought pitched battles with the lathials. In other places, even the zamindars went around villages urging the ryots to resist the planters. These zamindars were unhappy with the increasing power of the planters and angry at being forced by the planters to give them land on long lease. The indigo peasants also imagined that the British government would support them in their struggle against the planters. After the revolt of 1857, as I just told you, the British government was particularly worried about the possibility of another popular rebellion. When the news spread of a simmering revolt in indigo districts, the lieutenant governor toured the regions in the winter of 1859. The ryots saw the tour as a sign of government sympathy for their plight. When in Barasat, the magistrate Ashley Eden issued a notice stating that ryots would not be compelled to accept indigo contracts. Word went around that Queen Victoria had declared that indigo need not to be sown. Ashley Eden was trying to placate the peasants and control an explosive situation, but his action was read as support for the rebellion. As the rebellion spread, intellectuals from Calcutta rushed to the indigo districts. They wrote of the misery of ryots, the tyranny of planters, and the horrors of indigo system. Worried by the rebellion, the government brought in the military to protect the planters from the assault and set up the Indigo Commission to inquire into the system of indigo production. The commission held the planters guilty and criticized them for the cursive methods they used with the indigo cultivators. It declared that indigo production was not profitable for ryots. The commission asked the ryots to fulfill their existing contracts, but also told them that they could refuse to produce indigo in the future. After the revolt, indigo production collapsed in Bengal, but the planters now shifted their operations to Bihar. With the discovery of synthetic dyes in the late 19th century, their business was severely affected, but yet they managed to expand production. When Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa, a peasant from Bihar persuaded him to visit Champaran and see the plight of indigo cultivators there. Mahatma Gandhi's visit in 1917 marked the beginning of Champaran movement against the indigo planters. Let's have a quick look at the points we have covered today. First and foremost, we got to know how the revenue system was started by the company. Why did they feel that there was a need to improve agriculture? What problems did they see in the agriculture sector? How new systems like Mahalwari and Raitwari came to the forefront? Which crops were needed in Europe? And how it entirely changed the cropping system in India. How the Britishers persuaded or forced cultivators in various parts of India to produce other commercial crops. How Indian indigo stood out in the world. How indigo cultivation, its effects on local farmers and its effect on the land started a new rebellion, the rebellion which was named as the Blue Rebellion. We have covered all the points in today's session. Let's try to analyze what we have learned out of this session. Now you'll find a question and there are 4 options to it. You have to pick the correct option. The Champaran movement was against East India Company, the oppressive attitude of the planters, or none of the above. Yes, the Champaran movement was against the oppressive attitude of the planters. Next question. The company was appointed as Diwan of Bengal in 1762, 1763, 1764 or 1765. Yes, it was 1765 when the company was appointed as the Diwan of Bengal. Who devised the new system of revenue called Mahalwari? Was it Queen Elizabeth, Holt Mackenzie, Queen Victoria or Gandhiji? Very right, it was Holt Mackenzie who had devised the new system of revenue called Mahalwari. Growers of wood in Europe saw crop as a competition to their earning. Tea, rubber, indigo or coffee? Correct answer. Growers of wood in Europe found indigo as a competition to their earnings. Indigo production came down in Bengal in the year 1850, 1852, 1855 or 1859. Very right, 1859 is the correct answer. On your screens you can see 2 sets of words. In column A you have a few set, in column B we have another set. We just need to match the correct words with each other. So, Diwan is the chief finance administrator. Indigo, it is a plant producing blue color. What? It was the storage vessel. Mahal were the villages. Nij. Nij was the cultivation of planters' own land. And new Munro system was fixing the revenue. I hope this session with you was fruitful for you. We'll be back with many other videos. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy and keep studying. Namaskar.